Thank you. Good morning. I would like to begin my comments by acknowledging the territory that we are on. I acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen people on whose traditional territory we are on, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Saanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue. On September 22, the day after the election was called, we held a similar technical briefing and media availability on our plans to provide accessible and safe voting options for British Columbians in this election. An election has never before been held in British Columbia during a pandemic. COVID-19 has presented a number of significant challenges and unique challenges to electoral administration. I could not be prouder of the exceptional efforts by Elections BC staff and our service delivery partners across the province to bring us successfully to this point. And the response by British Columbians to voting in the pandemic has also been unprecedented. As of this morning, we have received close to 480,000 returned mail-in ballots, an increase of over 7,200% from the last election in 2017. An additional 681,000 voters have voted safely during the 7-day advance voting period. Never before have so many voters voted before Election Day in British Columbia electoral history. And I would like to thank all voters who have voted for following our instructions, for following our protocols, for listening patiently to the election officials in voting places, and for doing their part to help us maintain safe voting spaces in the province. I encourage those voters who have yet to cast their ballot to cast their vote tomorrow and participate in our democracy. British Columbia has the most accessible voting model in Canada. Tomorrow, between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Pacific time, voters can cast their ballots at any general voting location in the province. They can also vote from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific time at district electoral offices. If anyone still needs to return their vote by mail package in person, tomorrow is your last chance to do so, up until 8 p.m. Pacific time at a voting place or district electoral office. At voting places tomorrow, voters can expect safety protocols, including physical distancing, capacity limits in voting places, sanitization stations, protective barriers, and election officials wearing personal protective equipment. As I've mentioned previously, voting will be similar to getting a cup of takeout coffee or buying a few groceries at a grocery store in terms of the time spent and in terms of the safety protocols you can find. After voting closes tomorrow, ballots from advance voting and those cast on Election Day at general voting will be counted and the preliminary results in this election reported. The counting process for this election is the same process that has been used since the Election Act was materially updated in 1996. What will be different, however, is the number and percentage of ballots that are counted on election night. Usually, 90% of all ballots cast in an election are counted on election night. In this election, it could be between 65 to 70% of all ballots will be counted and reported on election night, with the remainder, perhaps 30 to 35%, counted at final count. Now, during an election, accessibility and integrity are key areas of focus for Elections BC. For advance and general voting, the primary integrity checks take place before a voter casts their ballot. A voter presents identification. Their registration is updated or they register if necessary. And a record is made of their participation. For vote by mail and for other absentee voting options, additional integrity checks are necessary. The certification envelopes containing these ballots are screened after Election Day to make sure that these voters did not vote previously in the election. The Election Act establishes that final count cannot begin until at least 13 days after voting day. And final count itself lasts 3 days. Because of the significant volume of vote by mail, preparations for final count and the count itself may take longer than usual. Our commitment is to complete this process as quickly as possible while maintaining the necessary integrity checks. When we accurately know the volume of vote by mail and other absentee ballots to be counted, we'll be able to determine when final count will begin, and we'll keep the public informed throughout this process. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have concerning the counting process for this election, and I strongly encourage any voters who have not yet voted to turn out tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder, please press star 1 to enter the queue. You are limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up only. Please also take your phones off mute. You will not be audible until your name is called. First question is from Mary Griffin, Check News.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much. I just wanted to follow up on one thing that came out during the technical briefing, is that Elections BC had done some modeling on the length of time it may take. Do you have any further information on that?
At the time, the modeling is really trying to determine what the differences in time will be based on volume and resources applied. So in a usual election, the preparation period is 13 days. It's usually done with a relatively small team at each district electoral office, and the count is usually done by the district electoral officer and the deputy themselves. So we're looking at, can we apply more resources to that? Is there work that some staff can do centrally at headquarters in addition to that to help make that process go more quickly? Can the district electoral officer apply additional resources and have counting teams supporting them during the final count, again, to be able to process the increased number of ballots within the time that we'd like it to take place? As was mentioned in the technical briefing, we would very much like to maintain the beginning of final count on November 6th, which is the 13-day period. However, that's still to be determined whether we're able to implement all the efficiencies, put in place the additional resources, and be able to properly and effectively screen all of the additional ballots that have been cast through absentee processes and vote by mail while maintaining the necessary safety protocols.
Mary, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Thanks. I know that generally the number of people participating in the general elections is declining, but is there any indication with so much interest in the advanced polls and the vote by mail that we'll see a bump in the number of British Columbians participating?
Yes, it's interesting in terms of looking at the numbers. In the election in 2013, out of the registered voter count, approximately 57% participated in the election. In the election in 2013. In 2017, that number was 62%. Close to 2 million voters voted in the last election. At this point, we're just over 1.1 million who have participated in terms of advance votes and the number of vote-by-mail packages received. So it is possible that we could have, depending upon turnout on voting day, we could have similar numbers as we had in 2017. That's why my encouragement certainly is if you haven't voted yet, please take the opportunity to do so at one of the safe voting opportunities tomorrow. And if you haven't returned your vote by mail package yet, the last day to do so will be rather on Saturday, not tomorrow, will be on Saturday at 8 a.m. To 8 p.m. Pacific time at a voting drop-off location, District Electoral Office, voting place, or at some Service BC locations.
Next question is from Rob Shaw, Vancouver Sun.
Oh, hi. In a perfect world, people would have put their mail-in ballots in the mail by the 17th, which Elections BC recommended. However, undoubtedly, there are some people who did not do that and put them in the mail Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday who are sitting here right now wondering what to do. And we heard in the technical briefing that there's no way for Elections BC to tell them if they've received or will receive their ballots in time. And they're probably sitting there wondering if they should go to the polling station tomorrow. What would you say to those people?
If you have returned your vote by mail package, you have voted in the election and you are not allowed to cast another vote. That would be multiple voting. We are, however, working very closely with Canada Post, and we will have election officials in the central processing plant in Richmond to receive any vote by mail packages that are there in that plant as of 8 p.m. Tomorrow on voting day. So obviously our strong recommendation was get your ballots, your vote by mail packages in the mail as of the 17th. I'm confident that if people did put them in the mail on the Monday or the Tuesday, that it's very likely that we will collect them at the Richmond facility on Saturday, and they will be included for consideration for final count.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, thanks. What happens if someone votes twice? I know in the act that's considered a corrupt act, but in this situation where you might have someone who doesn't understand any of this, who goes and votes in person because they're worried their mail-in ballot isn't going to land in time, is Elections BC obliged to investigate all of those cases? Are they obliged to prosecute people, or how do you approach those instances?
Yeah, so there's a couple of aspects there. If someone has voted in person, one of the integrity checks that is done is a review of all potential multiple votes. And so if someone votes in person and they also voted by mail, then that vote by mail package would get set aside. It would not get considered. If someone tries to vote twice by vote by mail or by other absentee processes, both of those certification envelopes are set aside and not considered. And that's very clear based on legislation and ensuring the integrity of the electoral process, one vote per person. We do a multiple voting review after every election. We look at every instance of potential multiple voting. And we apply resources to look at those and to follow up and investigate where necessary in those cases. In previous elections, there have been instances of multiple voting. Most of those are usually scenarios where perhaps a resident of a care home that we would send a mobile team to administer voting at is also taken by a family member perhaps to vote at early voting. In these cases, depending upon the circumstances, only one vote is counted. We'll look at that, and we have not made a determination in those cases previously to prosecute. There was a case in 2009 where an individual attempted to vote 5 times using various absentee processes. That was investigated and referred to the RCMP for follow-up. In that case, the individual had left Canada for Chile, which I believe doesn't have an extradition process. So there was no opportunity to do any prosecution on that case.
Next question is from Katie DeRosa, Times Colonist.
You spoke about the 13-day preparatory period. Can you actually lay out why it takes the 13 days? Is it just sending it to the electoral districts, or are the verifications for eligibility done within those 13 days? And if we're going to be voting by mail, perhaps increasingly in the future, does it have to take this long? Could the legislation change to allow it to be quicker?
So the 13-day time period, and actually if we talk historically in British Columbia, I believe we have had an initial count and a final count perhaps since 1896, I think in the 1920s there was a 21-day period between initial count and final count. Obviously, the numbers of absentee ballots were much, much less. So in this case, it's going to be a very busy 13 days. If it is 13 days, then it will be a longer time period if necessary. So all of the vote by mail packages, certainly that we've received centrally here in Victoria, they need to get sent to the electoral district of residence of the voters who cast those for the district electoral officers there to consider them. Across British Columbia at voting places where vote by mail packages have been dropping off and where other absentee ballots are cast. Again, these are all brought back to the district electoral office. The staff there will open any necessary outer envelopes, and they will do a sorting process, keeping the ones that belong to their voters and sending those to other electoral districts so that each certification envelope is only considered in the electoral district of residence of the voter. So as you can imagine, with right now a minimum of 500,000 of these, and anticipate that to be higher at the end of day tomorrow on voting day, it is going to take time. It's a manual process. There's many, many envelopes. We have to be certain that we're sending them to the correct electoral district. Some will have to have their outer envelope removed so that we can assess the information on the certification envelope. Following that shipping and receiving phase, then comes the screening phase. And this is where the certification envelopes are assessed to make sure, are they completed in accordance with the legislation? Did the voters sign the declaration on them? Did they put their date of birth? Did the date of birth match what's on our record? These are the integrity checks that we make sure are in place such that the voter, we know that the voter who is on the envelope is actually the voter that cast that envelope. Then we do other reviews. We do vote by the multiple voting reviews, and any, again, certification envelopes that do not pass this integrity check are then set aside. So this is, as I said, it's a manual process. It will take, at a minimum, the full 13 days to do this, even with additional resources added in all of our electoral districts. Our commitment, of course, is to do that as quickly as we can. In future elections, some of the modifications that were passed by the legislature in the Election Amendment Act 2019, but have not yet been brought into force, will allow for the use of technology and will allow for potentially shorter time frames in terms of how these absentee ballots are considered and when the final count may be. Vote by mail is always going to be a wild card. There was a question as to whether more voters will use this form in future elections. Will it become more of a standard option? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the unprecedented use of vote by mail by British Columbian voters is in response to the pandemic. Obviously it is in response, but will that carry on? Will they decide that that's a convenient way of voting that they want to use in future elections? And we're not sure about what that will look like. So it is possible. Certainly if vote by mail volumes return to lower volumes, to have a shorter period between initial count and final count. But for this election, minimum 13 days, and maybe longer. Obviously, our commitment is to do this as quickly as we can while maintaining the necessary integrity checks and while maintaining the safe office spaces that we need during this pandemic.
Katie, do you have a follow-up?
Yes. How many staff members are you expecting will be working through the mail-in ballots?
I don't have an exact number for that, but I know within each office there is probably a core team of 10 to 12 staff, and we're likely to augment that by as many additional resources as they need. The number of absentee ballots and vote by mail ballots to be considered and screened and checked in each district, of course, is going to vary by district. There are some that will have very low numbers relative to others. A number of districts will have a significant number. They'll obviously need larger amounts of people to do so, and they'll need larger spaces to be able to do so in a safe distance manner.
Lisa Houston, News 1130.
Hi there. Just regarding the staffing, just to add on to that, will you be extending hours so that when we get into this final count, and get into verifying that it can be done faster, or just sticking to regular 8-hour days?
That's a decision that I would expect my local district electoral officers to make based on the number of staff that they have and their ability to process and to get these done. While having extended hours is, of course, one option you can use, it is a very critical part of our electoral process. It's a part that we need to make sure is done correctly. It's a part that we need to make sure is done safely. So it may be possible for sure, but the focus is making sure that it's done accurately, correctly, and safely.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
Yes, and regarding the period after the election, just how are we going to see it again? So we're going to see during the first 13 days verified envelopes, and then as soon as the count starts after the 13th day, we'll see that tally every day. I wonder if you could just walk through how people are going to see it at home.
Sure. So on election night, we will be reporting, of course, the preliminary election results, and these will be the tallies of all of the election ballots that were cast during advance voting by advance voters and on general voting day at general voting opportunities. We will also be reporting the estimated number of absentee ballots that were cast during other voting opportunities. So these are people who vote at the district electoral office, people who vote outside of their district at other voting opportunities, whether that's advance voting or whether that is on voting day, people who may vote inside their district but not at their assigned voting place, and those ballots that were cast by mobile teams, perhaps if they're administering voting at a remote community or in a hospital or that type of a setting. So that number will be reported. We'll also be providing an update again tomorrow morning of the number of vote-by-mail packages received on a provincial basis. So these are the numbers that will be known tomorrow night. As we start being able to do some initial receipt of all of the vote-by-mail packages that have been dropped off in voting locations across the province, at office, at some Service BC locations, we'll start to get a better sense of the actual numbers of those and the districts to which they apply. So on a rolling basis, we'll start reporting those early next week and anticipate probably 4 to 5 days before all of the vote-by-mail packages have been gone through that initial process so that we can ascribe as to which electoral district that they will belong to. So as we proceed through the 13-day or longer window of preparation before final count, we'll be updating the number of certification envelopes to be considered at final count within each district to the point where on the day before final count will be taking place, we'll have a very accurate number of the number of certification envelopes to be considered in each district at final count.
Next question is from Penny Daflos, CTV.
I'm just wondering how many more staff you have hired overall to administer this election, whether it's for the counting the mail-in ballots or for manning the polling stations, all of that. Like, is it double your typical number? Just wanting a rough idea.
So I believe in the last provincial election, there were 25,000 election officials hired across the province. Elections BC centrally probably had about 200 staff, be about 130 additional staff to our core complement of 72 staff here in Victoria. The office staff in electoral districts is certainly going to increase and has increased, and they'll be bringing on more people. I don't have that exact number, but that is a number that we could determine and report on. In terms of the staff, the election officials that we're hiring, a couple of things that we did as part of our safe voting place plans is while we allowed for extra officials, extra information officers to help make sure that the safety protocols were being followed, we also reduced the number of election officials working at each voting station. There is usually 2, and we reduced that down to 1 as part of our safe voting place plans, which also reflected the direction of changes that were put in as part of the Election Amendment Act 2019 that was passed by the legislature and that was not yet brought into force. So I would say from an overall perspective, in the field at voting places, we're actually having fewer election officials working, but for the staff at district electoral offices and to help prepare us for final count, there will be much more than were before, but I don't have that number.
Do you have a follow-up, Penny?
I do, yeah. During the technical briefing, there was a mention that the mail-in ballot numbers will be updated every day on the website. And I'm just wondering, and then there was also the November 16th date thrown out as a possible, final date, hoping for everything to be done by. So I'm just wondering, how early do you think we could get final results for each riding, and how long is kind of like your nightmare scenario of how long it could possibly take? Like, are we looking beyond November 16th, or are you really hoping to be completely done by November 16th?
So the election calendar that was established when the election was called has final count beginning on Friday, November the 6th. There's a 3-day period for final count, which would take it to the Sunday. And there is then a 6-day window within which a judicial recount could be requested under certain criteria. The primary one, of course, being that the difference between the top 2 candidates is less than 1/500th of the total votes considered in that riding. Following that, the writs are to be returned, which would have the return day of the writs being the 16th of November. So that's the schedule that we very much are hoping to be able to achieve. A lot will depend on the progress that is made during early days for the shipping and receiving of all of the vote by mail packages and other absentee ballots. As I said, there's a minimum of 500,000 of those right now, and I anticipate that number will be increased significantly by the end of day tomorrow. And so that process, depending upon how efficient we're able to be, depending upon the resources that we're able to put to that, will obviously impact when we begin final count. As I said, I'm hoping we can hit to that. I don't think we'll know really as to when, if there needs to be a delay until further on in the process of preparations for final count. So I don't want to speculate on what that may look like. But as I said before, we're hoping to keep to the November 6th start of final count if we can. And our commitment is to do the count as quickly as we can, allow the district electoral officers to report on the elected candidate upon the conclusion of final count, while of course maintaining the necessary integrity checks and doing that in a safe fashion.
Next question is from Sarah Zenos, CBC Radio Canada.
Hi, actually, thank you, but it's really all good. The question was just asked
Thank you.
A few minutes ago.
Thanks so much. Next question is from Albert Van Santvoort, Business in Vancouver.
Oh, yeah. I was just wondering if there was any ridings that have low enough mail-in vote totals that you think might be able to be called tomorrow night.
As I've said before, tomorrow night, the only ballots that will be counted will be those at general voting day and the advanced votes. So they're preliminary results. There'll be preliminary results across the province. Elections BC, it's not our mandate to call an election. We simply administer the process and we make sure that the votes are counted and reported accurately. We won't have tallies of absentee ballots and certification envelopes for each district until following initial count and sometime into the next week. So my sense is that we won't know the number of certification envelopes and absentee ballots that are to be considered at final count in any district, and whether that total is perhaps greater than or less than the difference between the top two candidates in any riding until that time. So, as I said, we'll know what the preliminary results are, and then we'll be moving forward to preparing for final count.
Albert, do you have a follow-up?
No follow-up, thanks.
Thank you. Next question is from Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
Thank you. So once we get to this point where we start the final count, I'm just wondering if you can take us through what this is going to look like in terms of the potential, I guess, for a kind of a speed bump with the scrutiny of those mail-in ballots. And it seems like there's a lot of room for the parties to kind of lawyer up and spend a lot of time going through a lot of that. What is it actually going to look like? Is the district officer going to be involved in each one of those, reviewing each one of those? How do you have to space people out in more rooms, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so all of what you mentioned are parts of that. I think the model that we will be using is a model that was actually used by the district electoral officer in Nanaimo, Patrick McGuire, in the by-election that took place, the previous by-election, where they have a number of counting teams. They're set up kind of in a square. The district electoral officer is in the center. The teams are busy counting. Then any ballot that is objected to, what the team would assess it as, the district electoral officer makes that decision. So I would think that would be kind of a similar process that we would be using in all electoral districts. Obviously, in this case, there's going to be more spacing. There's going to be larger spaces. There's going to be protective barriers on the counting tables. Obviously, people are going to be wearing masks, allowing for distancing and things like that. But the legislation obviously sets out the guidelines under which ballots can be accepted or rejected. At initial count, the voting officer has the responsibility of adjudicating ballots. At final count, that responsibility is at the district electoral officer. And of course, scrutineers can make an objection if they don't agree with the adjudication of the ballot, and those objections are all recorded. In the case of initial count, the voting officer's decision is final. In the case of final count, the district electoral officer's decision is final. Of course, the initial count ballots may be part of a district electoral officer recount where they're reconsidered under certain criteria, including if the difference between the top two candidates is 100 or less. And then if there is a judicial recount, then of course the district electoral officer's decisions are considered by the judge conducting that judicial recount. So we're hoping that certainly with the setup that we're going to be doing, we're going to be allowing for a quicker progression through final count and the ability to count more ballots on a concurrent basis. But again, it's the district electoral officer who's making the final adjudication on any ballots that are objected to.
Justine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Just I heard your officials tell me earlier that the guidelines are very clear about what's acceptable on those write-in ballots. I'm just wondering if you've been asked already to make any rules on some of those questions of how that might turn out yet.
So the responsibility for making a decision for adjudicating ballots at final count, including ordinary ballots and write-in ballots, in our legislation is clearly with the district electoral officer. So, it's inappropriate for someone to make a ruling on a hypothetical situation that may or may not occur. What we have done is we have given, obviously there's clear guidelines. We have sample ballot markings for both write-in and ordinary ballots. That's part of our training material. That's in the material that we distribute to candidates. And the legislation, again, establishing the rules for accepting and rejecting ballots are, again, very clear. So these are going to be the basis for which district electoral officers are making their decisions at final count.
Next question is from Vaughn Palmer, Vancouver Sun.
Good day, and thank you for doing this. On election night, when you count the ballots, do you count the advance poll votes first, or at the end, or at the same time?
It's all done at the same time. It's a concurrent counting. What will happen is that, of course, the general votes are counted in the voting places following the close of voting and following the last vote being cast by a voter. The advance votes, the district electoral officer will make arrangements for where those teams will bring their sealed ballot boxes to begin the counts. In some cases, it will be at district electoral offices. In other cases, it will be at some voting places, or the DEO may actually rent another location to be used for counting of the advance votes. But once the close of voting happens, all of the counting is done concurrently.
Do you have a follow-up, Vaughn?
Yes, please. Our neighbors to the south, I think both Oregon, Washington, and pretty much everything is, all the votes are by mail, and the count down there appears to go a lot more quickly. Are there legal differences down there or procedural differences that allow them to do that more quickly than we do here?
Yeah, there certainly are. Part of it is the process by which they do that and when the ballots come in. And if it's all vote by mail, there's no other in-person voting opportunities that they have to wait until those are passed before opening up the certification envelopes to actually count the ballot. So once the ballot's been received, the voter can be struck off, and they can do a lot of the preliminary screening actually while the campaign period is still ongoing. In our case, we can't do any screening until after the close of voting, until after we know who has already participated at one of the in-person opportunities. So all of the screening must take place after voting day in British Columbia. And that's a key difference between the way that some states, vote-by-mail states in the U.S., do their processing and count their ballots.
We have time for one more question this morning, and that is from Les Lane, Times columnist.
Oh, thanks. It sounds like with the pandemic health restrictions and requirements and the 500,000 more labor-intensive mail-in ballots, it sounds like this election is going to cost a lot more than the standard sort of cost. I think it was $39 million in 2017. Do you have an idea how much more expensive everything you've described is?
Of course, we had some preliminary estimates in mind when we went forward into the election. What we're finding is that things are costing more money. This election will definitely cost more than the election in 2017. How much more at this point in time, I don't want to give an estimate, as obviously costs are still coming in and we're busy tracking all those costs. The election will be, the cost, of course, will be reported in detail in my report to the legislature following the election. So $39 million, we asked for approximately $6 million in pre-election, I guess, pandemic readiness costs. And then, of course, there will be the cost of administering. So that will be both the in-person opportunities and the vote-by-mail opportunities.
Les, do you have a follow-up?
You go to such great lengths to reach every voter or give them the option. Obviously, I guess because it's so fundamental. But we've got 71 patients in hospital with COVID-19. Is there any way of reaching them? I assume they're all in isolation. Are they out of luck, or how was that handled?
So we have developed a protocol for use in acute care hospitals where voters are in isolation, or if there is a lockdown in that hospital. There is a method of voting that was piloted under special voting rules in 2017 called operator-assisted telephone voting. And it was put in place at that point based on a model in Australia to provide a means for voters who have a semi-permanent or permanent disability that prevented them from casting their ballot independently to use this option to vote. So it is one that we brought forward in this election. It is an option that has actually proven very useful. There was a Canadian Forces ship deployed at sea, and we enabled the ship's company to vote using this method. I believe we've already had over 2,000 ballots cast under this special voting method, and it would certainly be one that a patient who is in isolation or an individual who is self-isolating at home could use if they're not able to use one of our other methods.
Les, do you have a follow-up?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you. That's all the time we have this morning.
Thank you.